It was back on January 8th of 2024 that in your second Centaurian Substack article, you actually came up with this notion of thinking in systems and thinking with systems. And you started with Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman. What better giant to stand atop his shoulders? So help us start understanding what you've gotten to and where you started with Danny Kahneman and, of course, the late Amos Tversky's work around thinking fast and slow in System 1 and System 2.
Look, I've been enamored with the work of Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, and like it was groundbreaking in his research, and it took a long time for people to really embrace it. And I love the fact that Danny Kahneman finally got around to writing everything into a popular book which everyone can read. And he brought this mental model of System 1 and System 2, which really encapsulated a lot of the research I'd been doing. One of the biggest breakthroughs as I looked at the neuroscience of motivation was understanding what is it that we've chunked through history, what is actually already embedded in our brains. And this is a lot to do with System 1. System 1 is our old evolutionary brain. And it can, not only do things which have been, basically embedded in our brains through genetics, which, take us back millions of years, allow us to be able to find the perfect landscape, our motivational system's hardwired in there. But System 1, the difference between System 1 and System 2, the best way to think about it is actually a set of statistics which I find fascinating, which is every second we process 11 million bits of information unconsciously in System 1. At the same time, System 2, which is our conscious brain, the thing which for all of us, when we think about thinking, it's the conscious brain. But this is what gives it, puts it into context. Our System 2, our conscious brain, only processes 50 bits. 50 bits versus 11 million. If that gives you a sense of the power which most people aren't tapping into because they are so enamored with our consciousness. So there's this arrogance and bias towards, our conscious brains has led a lot of people not to actually understand how to actually work with both systems. So what Danny Kahneman sort of mapped out was this sort of concept of, hey, understand that System 1 and System 2 are working together. Unfortunately, there isn't a great language between it. Well, there is a framework which I developed, which is questions, which is a long story, which I won't go into, but basically questions are the best way to think about how to actually get your unconscious to be able to solve problems for you. Because this is a supercomputer which you have access to, which has been processing, by a huge margin, the largest percentage of information which have been inputted into your brain. So go back to the input process output. You're inputting so much piece of information that you're not even aware of most of the time. And it's coming in and learning. The System 1 is learning the patterns behind it. And if you know how to access it, this is what creates the aha moment. So everybody talks about this idea when you're trying to solve a problem and you're sitting in front of your computer and you've been thinking about it, you can't solve it. You walk away and you're doing something else. And suddenly the answer comes to you. You weren't thinking about it, consciously, System 2. But suddenly the answer comes to you. So this gives you this indication that there's another part of your brain which has been thinking about this without making you conscious. It doesn't feel like anything most of the time, but it's been looking for those problems. And this is why giving it a question is what I call the programming interface for System 2. System 1. The System 1, System 2 programming interface allows you to do this. So this idea of thinking in systems, like you said, I had a sense that I had a good framework and I spend a lot of time like testing and kicking the tires and making sure, but I wanted to use this metaphor, which there was a number of different researchers who I was talking to at the time who were thinking about, is a large language model really System 1? It's not really System 2 yet. It's not, so the idea of people like using System 1, System 2 language together with this new wave of AI, there was a lot of talk going on. And I realized that actually we're thinking about it the wrong way. Let's actually build out the full library of systems that we think with, and let's start with System 1, System 2.
So we start with System 1 and System 2, our brains, and then you made a jump outside of the brain. And you coined this term of system zero, building on, again, standing on another giant's shoulders, and those giant shoulders being Andy Clark. So, what is this concept of thinking outside the brain? It's a new idea that you came up with. So, help us understand. I think we're starting to get there, but how did you come up with this system zero? What is system zero and the extended mind, and how have we been thinking outside of our brains?
Look, I've been obsessed with Andy Clark for probably close to 20 years. And I did TEDx, which basically was this framework I came up with, which is called Mind 4.0, about 15 years ago. And what it really did was took this idea of Andy Clark's. And Andy Clark has this concept called extended mind. And what that really means is he basically explains that we're the only creature to be able to think outside our heads. So remember the thinking process, input, process, output. We can actually think with something outside ourselves, which most other creatures, from far as we know, can't do. And what Andy Clark has this great example to be able to visualize this of like, hey, you're playing Tetris. You're playing Tetris with a video controller, and he goes, when you look at Tetris and you see the block coming down, you can revolve it around to see how it fits. Sometimes you can do it in your head. Like some people just look at it, they can spin it and goes, oh, it fits into there. So you mentally simulate it and then you move the piece in. Some people, when playing the game, actually spin the piece using the controller to be able to make it easier so they can imagine it. So they didn't have to use as much imagination, don't have to use as much of our system 2, our working memory, which is this limited sort of whiteboard space. And what he said was, what if, as you imagined it, you were actually connected to moving it? So get rid of the controller and make it as I think, it spins. So what he realized was that's the perfect example of what a true extended mind could be, when you can actually think outside your head. He also took it to the idea, like, whether it's cave painting, whether it's whiteboards, whether it's blackboards. I always loved from my research this idea of mathematicians are some of the heaviest users of blackboards, to the point they have blackboards in their elevators. These are like, even for, this building with about 3 floors, there's actually a blackboard in the elevator. This is how important it is, because the complexity of thinking that mathematicians do, they have to take things outside their head. And here's the other piece of system 2. We've already realized that it's a difference between 50 bits and 11 million. Here's the other bit, which is really constraining. Your working memory size, which is your conscious brain, it's like a little whiteboard in your brain, and it can only fit so many things. And this idea of 50 bits every second, but a better analogy is this idea of you can only process about 4 items. It used to be the magic number 7. What it's actually come down to is about 4 items. So you can only fit on your tiny little whiteboard these 4 items. But if you can extend it, which is what humans can do, we can think about far more complex things. And this is what mathematicians done. So I took that and I built that into this idea of like, hang on a minute, not only do we have system 1, system 2, let's think of this external passive system, which we can interact with, as a system 0.
So you went down to system 0 and then to system 3. And now we get to the title of the Centaurian Christmas lectures, Thinking with Machines. And here again, we've got Garry Kasparov. So help us understand this system 3.
So this goes back to this famous competition which Garry Kasparov co-founded. So it's like this idea, anybody could show up with a computer, AI computer, and be able to play chess in this competition. And what people started colloquially calling it was centaur chess. And what it was is, the idea of a centaur is, human body and sort of a horse's the horse's body and a human sort of a head concept. So this concept of centaur and centaurians is what I started calling this idea of thinking with a machine. So taking Kasparov's idea, taking this idea of like, hey, what happens if you actually start thinking with a machine? So not only can you play chess, but what happens if you can actually do, more complex things? And that's what, whether it's programming, whether it's solving problems, whether it's innovation, all of these things, like the concept of if we can actually have the right interface, we can create a better system. So this idea of system one, system two, interacting with this external systems three, which is intelligent in itself. So this is what I started calling Centaurian thinking. This was the nugget of the idea which started out, but then I started building all of these pieces together to be able to come up with this library of what I call 5 systems. So we've seen system 0, system 1, system 2, and system 3. There is another system which expands it even further.
And that brings us to thinking with the collective and this notion of collective intelligence. And because we can't talk about collective intelligence without acknowledging another giant on whose shoulders we're standing. And that's Abhishek Gupta, one of our dear friends who left us far too early and far too young this year. And yet you are able to take some of his thinking, along with folks like Gianni Giacomelli at MIT, and extend it further. And here it is, this 5th thinking system that you have coined, and you're calling it System X.
Look, Abhishek Gupta, really close friend of both of ours. While working at BCG, he was at the Henderson Institute. I worked really closely with him. His research was around collective intelligence, and he exposed me to a lot of this thinking. And so this system, this idea of System X and how we can think with not only each other. So our collective intelligence is, the idea of Thomas Malone's superminds, we'll tap into the human collective, the hive mind, but also the fact that it isn't just humans, it's also other machines and other agents. So look, System X is dedicated to Abhishek Gupta. So Professor X, as I always thought of him, is this inspiration for System X. So this idea of System 1, System 2, your brain, interacting with the hive mind, this collective, this idea is called System X. So how do we extend it? How do we work with each other? How do we work with eventually AI, which becomes autonomous agents? We're starting to see with agentic workflows. So this idea of being able to use this whole library of 5 systems, 0, 1, 2, which are inside our heads, System 3, which is this concept of centaurs and centaurian thinking, and then tapping into the hive mind, the thing which has made humanity stand on the shoulders of geniuses over and over and over again. We're all standing on the shoulders of these giants who've gone before us. And System X, which is dedicated to the giant I'm standing on the shoulders of, which is Abhishek Gupta.